Hey everybody, and welcome back. For this one, we're going to review chapters 9 and 10, and this is on physical, cognitive, and socio-emotional development in middle and late childhood. So for chapter 9, we have a lot of issues related to schooling since our kids are moving into the school age. And then for chapter 10, we'll discuss a little bit more about their peers, their emotions, and their social development. So we'll just kind of scan through physical development in the brain. So we've had a lot of slow, consistent growth. We're getting some stabilization in the brain volume, and we're getting more coordinated in our motor skills in middle childhood. A lot of in middle and late childhood, we see that kids are really in great health. So we're not seeing a lot of issues with poor health in these kids. The most common causes of death and injury are just accidents, or cancer is second. But a lot of children, though, really are not getting enough exercise. And so we do have children that are overweight in this age, that are not, or that are sedentary, they're not moving enough, and this can predispose them to difficulties down the lifespan. So we'll talk some about disabilities, IQ, and aging, or not aging, we're not quite to aging yet, although we are aging. Typically we use the word aging, though, when we're talking about our older adults. But we'll talk about disabilities first. So our intellectual disability, there are two criteria to be considered intellectually disabled. So you have to have an IQ score of 70 or below, and then problems adapting to your environment. So if we have someone with an IQ of 68, but they're adapted very well to the environment that they're in, they're showing very few deficits, we may not put that intellectual disability label on that person. As an important note too, psychologists do not use the term mental retardation anymore. This is something we've moved away from as a field, and we do not ever use that as a slang or a derogatory term either. So intellectual disability is our preferred term there. Learning disabilities are a little bit different. So with these individuals, there's individuals with learning disabilities. They have difficulty mastering specific subjects such as language or math. They can have, though, above average or average intelligence. So it's not necessarily an intellectual disability. It's a area of deficit within one specific skill. Some other areas that we may see start to arise when our children are moving into the school age. So we may have kids diagnosed with ADHD. Careful diagnosis is really important for ADHD, so we want a practitioner who knows kind of the criteria for ADHD rather than a teacher or even a pediatrician wouldn't be ideal. It'd be ideal more to go to someone with a psychological background. But of course, there are different areas of the country that have different resources available there. Typically, psychologists have found that meditation is great. Can't speak today. Medication plus some therapy or treatment is the best approach. So autism spectrum disorders, we can see these starting in the first years of life. It is a spectrum. So there's a saying in the autism field, if you've met one kid with autism, you've met one kid with autism. It's very much a spectrum, and people have different, different characteristics that have autism, and so we cannot paint everyone with autism with a broad brush. But they do generally have deficiencies in social relationships, stereotype patterns of behavior. Some educational issues. So if someone does present with a disability as they move into the school system, then we would want to set them up with an individualized education plan. So this is specifically set up and tailored for the student. It involves putting them in the environment with the least amount of restrictions and including them in with mainstream children. So we don't want to have children with disabilities sequestered to like a random room, that they don't ever see mainstream children. We would not want that to happen. We want children with disabilities to be integrated and taught alongside individuals without to the most extreme amount, possible. Piaget. So we've been talking about Piaget so far. We've gone through stages 1 and 2. And so we're in stage 3 now. Our kids are getting a little older, ages 7 to 11. And with this, Piaget thought that they had concrete operational abilities. And so they can mentally reverse some objects. So if this happens, then I can reverse it and say, well, that happened. I poured water in the fat glass and the skinny glass, but it was the same amount of water, and I can mentally reverse that in my mind. They can use logic, but they're still not quite in with abstract thought. So that'll come in the next stage, our final stage for Piaget. Kids are having really big improvements in their information processing, so better attention and memory. They're using better strategies, so they're elaborating when they're trying to remember something, using things like, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, to remember, order of operations. So they're using mnemonics, they're thinking things through rather than just rehearsing it in their brain, like, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally is a much better strategy than just going and saying over in your head, parentheses, exponents, parentheses, exponent, and just trying to repeat it over and over and over. It's easily lost if all we do is rehearse. So elaborating, using mnemonics, much better strategies. So they're getting better at knowing what they know and what they don't know. They're getting better at what we call metacognition. So this knowledge of what we know, the knowledge of what we don't know, how we can improve what we know, all of this is a really sophisticated way of thinking. And so it's like cognition, but meta. So it's above cognition, knowledge of what we know. And the same thing with knowledge of memory. So we know if we want to remember something, we learn what strategies help us to remember. That's meta memory. So what does it mean to be intelligent? This is a really complicated question. For psychologists, though, it's the ability to solve problems, adapt, and learn from experiences. Intelligence testing is a really difficult thing to do. It's got a really storied history, far from perfect. There's been a lot of issues with intelligence testing in the past, and there still are. But this kind of started with Binet and Simon, so they needed a way to distinguish bright children from dull children. They used mental age to do that. So if you are 8-year-old and you have a mental age of 10, then you're bright. If you are 6 years chronologically, but your mental age is 3, you'd be dull. And so they would use this formula that Terman helped develop, but really just looking at your mental age by your chronological age. And that's where we get these IQ scores that so many of us are used to looking at. So the average there would be 100. One standard deviation on either side would be 85 to 115. So that's where most of us are going to fall. So significantly lower or higher than that is uncommon. So psychologists would use things to test one's IQ. We still do use the Stanford Binet. We also can use the Wechsler. So it'll ask questions like, in what way are a lion and a tiger alike? What's the advantage of keeping money in the bank? So some of these are, asking more complicated questions, but it also looks at, working memory and processing speed. However, there is an understanding that in no way do these kinds of formal tests really understand or illuminate the entire spectrum of human intelligence. So there's been other theorists who have tried to make this work a little bit better. Gardner is one, and he said that we have many forms of intelligence. So we have, knowing where our body is in space is bodily intelligence. Knowledge of the self is intrapersonal. Knowledge of the natural world is naturalistic. So he just said we have, some of us are high and low in each of these areas. Sternberg believed that we have analytical intelligence like mathematics and logic. We have creative intelligence, being able to put things together in novel ways. And then we have practical intelligence. So if you had $50 and you had to feed your family for 2 weeks, that's a practical intelligence type of problem. So this is almost where we see that book smart versus street smarts idea, that some things are more logic-based, but then people can really struggle then with practical application. So how well do all of these kind of tests work, especially those that more based on the Stanford Binet model that use IQ scores? If we have someone's IQ score, so if it suddenly popped on top of your head and I could know your IQ that way, it would help us predict things like grades and longevity, but it's far from perfect. So it doesn't predict things perfectly. We have a lot of people who have a high IQ and who just don't really perform well at all. They get, for different reasons, people who maybe have a lower IQ but are really, really well suited to their environment and do amazing things. So some, things that really can help us understand why IQ is not predictive all the time is things like self-discipline. So, putting your mind to things and doing them. Grit, which is kind of treating life like a marathon, not a sprint. So, keep getting up even if you fall down, super gritty. And then the mindset that we have. So a growth mindset, saying every challenge that I have is an opportunity for growth rather than, this is what I was born with, this is what I've got. If I don't understand math, I'll just never get it. So we've got kind of a depiction there to help you understand those two differentials. Heredity in the environment. So IQ is something we can, it is heritable, but the environment plays a huge role. And this really helps us see, too, there's been controversy. There was a book called The Bell Curve that was published. It was very controversial for good reason, because it was shoddy analysis. But ethnic groups do differ somewhat in IQ, but really this is a lot to do with bias testing and with things like socioeconomic status. So our tests are often really biased. Some of the questions they ask, at least in the past, they've been working on this, but at least in the past these tests would ask something like, all of the following but one are parts of the yacht. And so you'd have to say what was not part of a yacht. I've never been on a yacht. I don't know if y'all have. But for, that test question is really geared towards people then with a lot of money who go on yachts. And it doesn't have anything to do with how intelligent you are. It's just this is a really bad question focused only for those people who have money. And so that's a big issue with our standardized testing. And that's why when we interpret our test scores, we really want to focus on they demonstrate adaptation to a particular context. So it's not fair to everyone. They're not appropriate tests in many ways. They're tests made by humans to judge other humans, and we have to know that that's the case. So some gifted children, traditionally this was based on IQ, but today it also includes talent in different areas like writing and dance. Often children who are gifted have divergent thinking, so they can think of many different ways to solve a problem or think of novel ways to solve a problem. It's not possible to just take your kid and force them to be gifted in a certain area. Like, I love music, I'm going to make you into a musician, kid. The child themselves really needs that love of topic. But you do need parent support and often early instruction. So if you would be an amazing pianist, but you've never seen a piano before, you're obviously not going to be gifted on the piano. So you have to have that early instruction and availability. This will move us into the start of Chapter 10, which is some of our social development. So with Erickson, he said in this middle childhood to late childhood age, what we're trying to learn to do is to learn basic skills to work with other people. So industry versus inferiority. Can we do a good job, learn those skills, work well with others? A lot of those things we think about kids learning in the classroom. There's a lot going on with the self, and so this has lots of definitions on this slide that you can read through that psychologists will use. Emotional development, we are seeing some changes with their emotions. Typically, they're developing a better capacity for emotion regulation and for dealing with others and recognizing others' emotions. They're also developing in their morality. So Kohlberg was a theorist who studied morality. He presented a dilemma to people, which there's a YouTube video you can watch there, but generally it was something like this guy's wife is dying of cancer. He tries to get the drug in legal ways that she needs. She needs this medication. He can't seem to find a way to do it, so he wants to steal the drug. Should he steal it or not? The important thing that Kohlberg was interested in is the reason that people would give the answer they gave. So it wasn't yes or no, but really why they said that you should do it or not do it. So the people at the lowest level would just say, is punishment or reward? He shouldn't steal it because he'd go to jail, or he should steal it because maybe his wife will give him a kiss. Just the most basic punishment and reward. For those who are a bit higher, this is conventional, and this is social norms. Most of us are there. So most of us will say, well, our society decided we should do this or do that, and so, that's what we should do. However, sometimes people will go into a post-conventional stage, so some individuals are beyond the social norms and have moved more into personal moral codes. So we think of this as some of our, really important, like moral leaders, like totally blanking on moral leaders, but like people like Gandhi, Mother Teresa, Martin Luther King Jr., people like that, that have maybe these personal moral codes that help them dictate their behavior, moving above what's just common for society. Kohlberg does have critics, though, so there is too much emphasis on thoughts. There is this idea Gilligan had with gender versus care and justice, so saying that women would focus more on care, whereas men would focus more on justice with their morality. But that really the biggest thing we can do to promote our moral reasoning, though, is just discuss moral dilemmas openly. So if you have a dilemma at work, you could talk about it with your kid if it's an ethical dilemma and see what they think and kind of work through, how you would solve that problem, so you can discuss these things openly. Gender, so with gender we've got stereotypes. This is often coming into play with our young children. There are some differences between boys and girls, and so we've got some of those listed here, but generally there's not enough differences for psychologists to say that we should justify or support single-gender schools. There are some schools that do this well, but on average we think that these differences are pretty minor, and we've got that listed there. This part you can read on families. So we just have differences as the kids grow older, differences with our peers. So intimacy becomes a huge thing with our peers. We want to be intimate with our friends, have them know us, we know them. So it's not physical, like sexual intimacy, it's more that emotional intimacy. But as we get into that middle childhood and later stage, our friends really begin to know us. It's not just the kid in the neighborhood that I play ball with. It's that they actually know who we are. They're preferring same-sex peers. They're not as well supervised. One thing that psychologists will do to understand how kids kind of fit in with their peers is this idea of sociometric ratings. So with this, a psychologist would go into a classroom with children, and they would ask them to do a very simple task, which is just tell us who's your friend and who's not your friend. And they'd be able to take these ratings of who you like and who you don't like and look at them across the entire classroom, and they would see that there are certain categories of kids. So some kids are frequently nominated as a best friend, and nobody really seems to hate them. Those are popular kids. Rejected kids are those who are actively disliked. So very few people say, this is my friend. Instead, you get a lot of kids who are saying, I don't like that guy. Just don't like him. So those kids are the ones we worry about because they can be regressive or withdrawn, and it can lead to issues down the road. Controversial kids are those who some people love, some people hate, so they're pretty controversial. Oftentimes this is like a class clown. Some people think they're hilarious, other people think they're annoying. Average kids, it's most of us would fall into that. So maybe that we have that one guy that doesn't like us, but that other guy who says, oh yeah, it's my best bud. And, so just kind of this average number, not exceptionally interesting. In terms of the ratings, interesting people, of course. And then neglected, they really don't see their name come up at all, and that's a hard category as well. So they don't really have friends, but they don't really have enemies. Nobody seems to notice them, and those kids can be at risk as well. Bullying, so with this we're seeing behavior that is intended to disturb. So there's been a lot of research on bullying and a lot of societal impact on bullying. Many kids have reported that they've been bullied, and this bullying can be instrumental, so that's just trying to move to a different position. Like if I knock you down while we're playing basketball because I want to get to the goal, then that's instrumental aggression. But a lot of times with bullying, we see more aggression that's hostile, so like actively coming for you, or relational. So, making your friend, manipulating people behind your back, almost that mean girl approach is relational aggression. And then cyberbullying. So cyberbullying is something rather new. It used to be people could only bully you while you're standing there on the schoolyard, or they'd have to come to your house. Now they can bully you anytime, day and night, 2 in the morning on your electronic device. You can open it up and it says, hey, you suck. Then it can make you feel bad then. So this is a whole another type of bullying that can have really problematic effects, and that we're really just starting to kind of scrape the surface of what's going on there. But we do know that bullying can have negative long-term effects, and this is for both the child and the child who's being bullied as well as the bully. So that's what I tell my kids when they say somebody was mean to me. People who are bullies are often not very happy people. If you're really happy in your life, you're not often going around attacking others, right? So they often have a lot of stress or strain, maybe have been bullied themselves in the past, aren't really sure how to get positive peer relationships going, and so we can see really negative effects for the bullies as well in many cases. And this is our last slide of this chapter. So with this one, you can just kind of read through that, but I'm just saying that when we improve schools, or that we need to be mindful of socioeconomic status when we try to improve schools and things like that, and really reduce barriers to learning for all groups. Well, this has been chapters 9 and 10, and it's been great to talk to you all, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.